Nearly 5 months after the election, Ashraf Ghani is declared the president of Afghanistan, but a power struggle is already underway in Kabul. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The Independent Election Commission announced this week that Afghan President Ashraf Ghani will remain in office for another 5 years. The Commission says Ghani defeated his former deputy and main rival, Abdullah Abdullah, in the September election. Abdullah Abdullah called the results a coup against democracy and is vowing to form his own government.
The result the Independent Election Commission announced today was the result of election robbery, a coup against democracy, the betrayal of the will of the people, and we consider it to be illegal.
The election turmoil comes at a critical time for negotiations with the Afghan Taliban. The United States recently announced a possible breakthrough in peace talks with the start of a 7-day reduction in violence. The United States has been negotiating for over a year now in an effort to end the 18-year war, America's longest conflict. Well, for more on Afghanistan's election and prospects for peace, let's bring in our panel. Here in our studio is Omar Samad. He served as the Afghan Ambassador to France and Canada and is a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's South Asia Center. Also with us, Ahmad Shah Mohibi is the founder and president of the non-profit organization Rise to Peace. From Detroit, Saeed Khan is a lecturer in the Department of Near East and Asian Studies at Wayne State University. And Jack Midgley served in Afghanistan as a U.S. Army civilian advisor and is the principal of Midgley and Company. Thank you to all of you for being with us. Ambassador, let me start with you. 5 months after the election, we have a result and we have a power struggle underway, as we just reported. The opposition candidate, Abdullah Abdullah, is rejecting the outcome. Do we have another political crisis in the making?
We already have a political crisis, and it's been in the making for the past 5 months, unfortunately. There are procedures, there are laws, there are regulations that have to be followed. One of the election monitoring groups, a professional monitoring group, today came out and said this was a huge surprise to see the Election Commission suddenly look at the results that the Election Complaints Commission had turned over to them, and without any warning, without any type of insight into how they managed to count and recount the votes, they came out and announced a winner. And so even election monitors in Afghanistan are questioning how this was done. And obviously it is a very political issue. It has split sort of the country. And it's happening, as you mentioned earlier, at a time when the focus should have probably been more on the peace process and less on Afghan politicking.
You worked for Abdullah Abdullah, you know him. What are his options right now? He's rejected the results, so what does he do?
So at this point, after he did, I think he consulted with his team, they decided that they were going to go ahead, first of all, not agree with the decision, and go ahead and form and work on the formation of a consensus-based as well as an inclusive government. I'm not exactly sure what this means at this point, but it's a message also to every Afghan political group to say we need a broad-based approach here. And I think that moving forward, this is a message that a lot of other politicians are going to analyze very seriously. I think former President Karzai has already had meetings. Other candidates who also failed have pronounced themselves. They also don't agree with the results. And so this has become a huge issue in Kabul. We will see over the next few days how they can figure out some kind of a solution or moving forward to some type of a broad-based approach to solving this problem.
Ahmad, this comes, as the ambassador says, at a very crucial time. It creates a lot of uncertainty in the country. But what were the options for the Election Commission? Should they have had maybe a runoff election to decide on who the leader would be?
I mean, first of all, glad to be here. And second, it's Afghanistan. It's an unpredictable country, and you do not understand what's going to happen the next day. The same thing happened during the Mujahideen, the Taliban, and present now. I would say given Afghanistan, I agree with the ambassador, it's just not a decision that could bring more crisis in Afghanistan. Given the base option, it would have been with the opposition or working on an interim government where you should bring the Taliban and create into an intra-Afghan government and intra dialogues that could form to pave the way for intra-Afghan dialogues and be able to form and advance political settlements. I think elections, President Karzai, when I interviewed him 2 years ago, he said that we are not ready to have an election. The government is not as strong, we do not have territory, the Taliban is stronger, so we need to work on peace. We need to make sure we have some sort of guarantees so we could be able to move forward.
Would it have been better for these negotiations, the peace negotiations, to have taken place first and then got the Taliban to contest the elections as well?
I think that would be the perfect thing because the Taliban today, in a letter, Sirajuddin Haqqani, the deputy leader for the Taliban, he wrote to New York Times that it says we want an inclusive Afghan government.
Yeah.
So they want to have a power sharing. So power sharing in Afghanistan, in a country built on tribalism, a lot of tribes, 14, 15. General Dostum, Hikmatyar, Abdullah Abdullah, and we have Muhaqiq, Khalili. So we have a lot of these political leaders that needs to be involved. So the current administration in Afghanistan is following the Fork of Columbia kind of style. Right. Like, well, the rebels come join us. We will give you, we will do some sort of reintegration, and at the same time, we will not put you in prison. So that is not going to work in Afghanistan. I think it would be best if there was a system in advance already where the Taliban has Afghans and then go on elections. I think that should be a recipe, just bringing like President Hamid Karzai in the beginning. Right. So I think that would have been better.
Yeah, Jack, could that have been done? Because the Taliban have refused to work with the Afghan government on the one hand. They don't want to work with Ashraf Ghani.
And I think that's the key point. Yeah. If we ask who is served by the sudden announcement, Abdullah did exactly what he had to do. He could not have concurred with the result. So who's actually served? At this critical point in the peace negotiations, it seems to me that who's served is Ghani himself and the donor community, which at this time, when negotiations between the United States and the Taliban are at a critical point, the international donor community needs to know who is in charge of the government, because that's where the international aid money goes. $8.5 billion a year. That's a huge fraction of Afghanistan's entire GNP of 20 billion. And 75% of all public expenditures in Afghanistan come in the form of international aid. Ghani, maybe uniquely among all Afghan politicians, has tremendous credibility with the international donor community. Yeah. And affirming his win allows the international donor community to back the next step between the Americans and the Taliban.
Jack, Ashraf Ghani has certainly taken this result and is running with it. This is what he had to say. Let's watch this.
I'm dedicating this victory of the people to the people. And as the first servants, with our united team, we will always safeguard the rights of the Afghan people. We want peace, a lasting peace. That is the country's demand. And this team will bring peace to all of Afghanistan.
There's another question. The United States has not sent him any congratulations, a message of congratulations yet. Why not?
Again, I think the state of the negotiations doesn't require that the United States take any more action. What's been said about President Ghani has been said, and he commented it's a victory for the people. If it's a victory for the people, it's a victory for not very many people. There are 38 million Afghans. Only 8 million are registered to vote. Only about 2 million actually voted.
That's right, yeah.
And fewer than 1 million voted for Ashraf Ghani. So a tiny fraction of the Afghan population has cast ballots in favor of Ashraf Ghani. If he's anything in Afghanistan right now, it seems to me, he is the fulcrum, the focal point for the delivery of international aid. He will certainly step aside in the long run. Yeah. But for now, having a stable focal point for the receipt of that aid, I think is absolutely essential for the negotiations to proceed.
The focal point has to be legitimate.
Yeah.
The focal point has to have the vote, the credible and transparent vote of the Afghan people, not a vote that is disputed by a very large number of Afghans, and where if you go and look at how it was done, and statistically, it was not a very properly handled, managed election. That is very clear. Yes. And so I think that it's not really about aid and the money, because that will flow and the administration is there. It has nothing to do with one person. It's the overall bureaucracy that handles that. So it has to do with making sure that we have a credible government, a legitimate government, that can move the country towards peace, as you were saying earlier. Right. Otherwise, we would be entering a very slippery slope area.
All right, let me bring in Saeed Khan. He's in Detroit. Saeed, what do you make of the latest turn of events?
Well, I agree with the ambassador's assessment when President Ghani is making such an assertion that he is representing the people when he garnered fewer than 1 million votes out of a population of 38 million. That's rather specious. I think that the article today in the New York Times by Mr. The Taliban leader, I'm sorry, was the Haqqani. Thank you. Yeah, was very telling. I think it also shows a very crystallized way of understanding what is the American involvement. Now there is enough of a track record of President Trump and this administration when it comes to what are the major calculations that they make when it comes to deal making. And in the case of Afghanistan, President Trump is driven by one factor and one factor alone, and that's time. This is his re-election year. He operates on the conceit that he has made certain promises and that he wants to keep them as though it is a checklist. And of course, one of these promises has been the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. Now, at the same time, the Taliban are quite wary because in the region, they've also seen a similar pledge made by the Trump administration to withdraw troops from Iraq. But as we've seen in that situation, it has been a rather murky scenario because now the United States is making excuses to stay there longer than they had said they would, even defying a parliamentary vote in Baghdad to ask or to demand the United States to leave. The State Department has then said, we will leave if you pay us to leave. And the Taliban are rightly worried that that is going to be a situation that is going to visit them in the same country. So confidence on all sides seems to be very, very low at this point.
And the fact that there's a question mark over the legitimacy of the election, Saeed, how does that complicate things?
Well, again, this is a matter that there is a lack of confidence on the part of the Trump administration, and as the point was made earlier, one of the reasons why congratulations have not yet been dispatched to Kabul. And second of all, the Taliban, as has also been said, is rather wary of Ashraf Ghani. They're not sure that if and when the result is codified in Kabul, will it be Ghani with whom they will be negotiating? Will it be Abdullah with whom they're negotiating? And how, again, this plays out with the American role in the region.
Ahmad, what does the Taliban get out of this peace deal? Do they get a seat at the table without having to contest anything?
Well, the Taliban are, idealistically, they're after an Islamic emirate, and that's what they have been saying. But today, Sirajuddin Haqqani, he was saying, well, we want to build our country, we would like to have an inclusive government, and we would like all the foreign troops out. So I think this deal for the Taliban, first of all, they're after a worldwide reputation. They want to gain the reputation that they were toppled out in 2001. And they're not FARC of Colombia. They had a government for 5 years. So that for the Taliban, this is a big movement, this is a big state. If they keep their actions and their promises in reduction of violence that the U.S. and the Taliban are working right now, 7 days of ceasefire, I think it gives so much legitimacy to the Taliban, to their purpose, their mission, and eventually the 60,000 Taliban joining the Afghan government with the reintegration, rehabilitation, and they could have some sort of power sharing. But one thing that frightens me, the Taliban haven't, until this point, they haven't announced their stand on human rights, women's rights. Today they were saying, well, we would like to offer some sort of protection for the Afghan woman and the Islamic system. Well, to Afghans, what kind of Islamic system they have been using it for their political objectives? Stoning women to death and things like that have been a big challenge. I was in Afghanistan, and a lot of women have been worried about this. They do not want to lose the gains of the past 18 years. So for Taliban, reduction of violence is a best opportunity to prove that you're willing to negotiate. You're willing to bring peace in Afghanistan.
Ambassador, the United States Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, he was talking in Brussels last week. This is what he had to say. Let's listen to it.
The United States and the Taliban have negotiated a proposal for a 7-day reduction in violence. I'm here today consulting with allies about this proposal, and we've had a series of productive bilateral and collective meetings about the path forward. We've said all along that the best, if not only, solution in Afghanistan is a political agreement.
Do you get the sense, Ambassador, that the U.S. is pushing this really hard? In fact, maybe a little hasty in this because it's becoming an election year issue.
Well, this process of having an agreement with the Taliban, this bilateral discussion has been going on for a year and a half almost. So already, if you remember back in September, President Trump put a hold on it at the last minute. Right. And then people thought it was dead, but it was revived. And the goal of this administration is to have a deal with the Taliban and then open the door to intra-Afghan talks, and meanwhile reduce violence as much as possible, and then start to talk about ceasefire during the intra-Afghan talks. So there's a roadmap that has been at least discussed among some of the stakeholders. What obviously is happening at this point is that there are some people who are very uneasy about the peace prospects. There are those who feel that they may lose power. There are those who think they may gain power, that there's an opportunity to, there's a lot of politics involved here. And there are countries in the region who also have a stake in stability in Afghanistan or instability in Afghanistan. Right. And so some are playing a constructive role, some are playing a not so constructive role. And the Afghans at this point, with the elections coming into the midst of all of this, would like to see the process move towards a broad-based approach towards peace, so everyone can be at the table. You cannot have just one person, especially when the other side, meaning the Taliban, have made it quite clear that they are not going to talk to the current government as the government, but they are willing to talk to everyone as Afghans. And so I think that we need to find some kind of accommodation here where everyone can end up being at the table instead of trying to sideline everyone. Right. And try to be the only person at the table.
Jack, the Taliban have long called for the United States to leave Afghanistan. So what kind of a future does the U.S. have in Afghanistan, given that this deal will call for that?
Well, the Haqqani essay today can be boiled down pretty simply. He wants foreign troops out, and he wants foreign money in. Foreign money in means the United States. So the definition of troops, I think, is likely to change in the years ahead. I don't think we're going to see a long-term U.S. combat presence in Afghanistan. But two things are true. No American government can accept at any time in the future a terrorist attack that originates or can be attributed to Afghanistan. So some type of security guarantee, probably backed by some type of an American presence, is likely to be required. I think the other thing that's true, especially in the current administration, is containment of Iran is extremely important. Tolo reported this week that the Iranians are now exporting man-portable anti-aircraft weapons, missiles, into Afghanistan. Neither the report nor the fact is accidental that this is all happening this week. The Americans want to make sure, need to make sure, that the Iranian influence to the West, which is already heavily felt around Herat and western Afghanistan, does not turn into political influence that can shape the long-term outcome. So there are two very big American interests there. The advantage that the Americans have is that they control the donor community and the bulk of the financial support that the Taliban or any future Afghan government will need. So I think they will leverage, the Americans will leverage that power to get some type of long-term presence on the ground. It may be limited to Bagram or Kandahar. It may be very small, but there'll be enough of a presence there to allow the Americans to be sure that both of those priorities are met.
Saeed, if we have all the parties coming to the table and negotiating some kind of peace settlement, that's going to call for all kinds of conditions to be met. Who's going to make sure that those conditions are met and make sure that they are enforced?
Well, first of all, I think we have to define who all the parties are. Recently, we know that the Taliban at a very high level was meeting in Beijing while the negotiations were going on in Doha. So clearly and with respect, I don't think that the only money coming into Afghanistan could come from the United States or from the West. And perhaps it's a bit erroneous for Secretary Esper to be briefing only NATO allies in Brussels, when it's more important to have regional stakeholders not only briefed but also being at the table. And that would include China, that would include Pakistan, that would include India, and yes, it would also include Iran. So all of these forces, first of all, have to be at the table to negotiate with the Taliban, and each of them has some legitimate, as well as in some cases, as was mentioned, illegitimate impetuses for the stability or the instability of Afghanistan. But only if there is that level of transparency, only if there is that level of direct multilateral talks, can we then move to the question that you've asked as to who is going to enforce the kinds of conditions or preconditions that are placed on the Afghan government.
Ambassador, one other thing, and that is the U.S. negotiator Zalmay Khalilzad. He bypassed the government, didn't he, in forging this deal? I mean, because according to the Washington Post, he doesn't have much confidence that Ghani can pull together his allies and, you know, bring up a united front to deal with this.
I don't think that he bypassed anyone in particular. He has been dealing with the Taliban. That's his mission, I think. He has come to terms with the Taliban on what this agreement should look like. And we don't have the details of this agreement, by the way. A lot of speculation out there. But at the same time, he has briefed continuously all the main stakeholders, including Ghani and Abdullah and others in Afghanistan, as well as the regional players, including the countries that were mentioned earlier, and the Europeans as well. So there is a process that has been in place for the past year and a half. Some people are happy, some are not. At this point, the critical question over the next probably 10 days or 2 weeks is, first of all, how is the Afghan political crisis out of this inconclusive election going to impact the peace process? Secondly, is the agreement between the U.S. and Taliban going to be signed, or something is going to sidetrack it or postpone it or kill it? Because there are those who don't like this deal. They, as I said, they see it as a threat to their base, their political base. And this means that Afghanistan will continue the path of war. So it's basically a question between, are we going to promote more war in Afghanistan because we couldn't get everybody at the table the way that it should be, or are we going to give peace a chance? This opportunity that has come along, a lot of people have died for this along the way, and more people may die, but give a chance to Afghans, Talib and non-Talib, as well as the region and others, to be part of a process. But the core questions have to be addressed by Afghans.
So very quickly, how big a risk is it that this could unravel?
I see this as being a target and for some in Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan today. And I see others who are taking position to take advantage of the opportunity that has presented itself. So there are basically right now two lobbies, let's say, that are pursuing divergent agendas.
Okay. Ahmad, you know, as Saeed Khan just told us a moment ago, regional powers have to be involved in this as well. The Afghan Taliban's main patron is Pakistan. What role did Pakistan play in this?
Well, first I want to add on what Mr. Ambassador said. Well, the U.S. have been, since 2001, one policy is rebuild Afghanistan. That's the mission of the United States, bring democracy. And the whole goal was to have the Afghan government be strong enough to work with rivals and the Taliban and build Afghanistan. Well, that didn't happen. This is the chance, and this is what the U.S. is doing, and special envoy haven't bypassed anything. It's just a U.S. deal, and that's what's happening. I think the role of regional actors in the Afghan peace process is very, very crucial and significant. Afghanistan's strategic location and the Pakistan have been in the last 2 years, since June of 2018, have been more supportive of the Afghan peace process. Whether it has been the U.S. pressure and sanctions, economic sanctions, or the Pakistan just feel like, well, let's help our neighbor to bring peace there. And it has been also the U.S. decision that the Afghan government wasn't able, the national unity government wasn't able to create a form of government with rivals to take the lead in the peace. That was the second thing. And the third thing was the President Trump's election campaign of 14, that we would like to bring our endless war and finish that. I think Pakistan plays a big role. And Pakistan could really push the Taliban leadership living in Kuwait and Shura, and even in Doha, Qatar, and just push them to negotiate. I think in Doha, in the last couple of 9 rounds of talks, Pakistan have played a big role in this. And giving the Taliban birthplace, Pakistan, a lot of confidence needs to also be built between Afghanistan and the Pakistan government. There's a lot of hatred, there's a lot of mistrust and gap. That's one key. China, a lot of economic advancement in Afghanistan. Iran is going to be a big a challenge, a barrier to the peace process, given the latest tensions. And also the regional actors, also China, Russia. I think it's all these countries could play a big role in Afghan peace process. But one thing I would like to add on is it's very complex. Afghanistan is not an easy fix. I'm optimistic, but at the same time, I see a route to peace really long. But that requires the Afghans itself, a unity, national compromise. The current election was happening. I think that needs to be the first agenda in order to have a sustainable peace. There is not that much the United States could do to bring peace. U.S. is trying to bring the 18 years of U.S. longest war in Afghanistan to an end. But prosperity, peace, path to peace is the Afghans themselves.
Saeed, what are your thoughts on the role that Pakistan could play in this?
Well, Pakistan has always been a very strategically important player in this region. Certainly, in many capacities, it was thrust into that role going back to 1979 during the Afghan-Soviet War. More recently, of course, because of the so-called war on terror, and then even more recently because of the tragedy of Afghanistan serving in many ways as a proxy war between Islamabad and New Delhi. If there is some way for Afghanistan to no longer be a theater within that broader conflict between Pakistan and India, that will bring on its own a form of stability to Afghanistan. And I think we're seeing that happening now. There seems to be a recession of Indian influence within Afghanistan, something that's palpable enough for Pakistan to have as a response its greater pledge or commitment to seeing a stabilized Afghanistan.
Ambassador, very quickly, I've only got 30 seconds. The Taliban will also have to decouple its relationship with Al-Qaeda, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. That's, I think, one of the requirements is to decouple with Al-Qaeda and any other international terrorist organization. Not only that, but to go further and be a positive actor in the future in Afghanistan, in governance and the power sharing that may happen if things go forward.
Lots of mays and ifs. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching. Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists and others. It's a fresh, focused and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict or US politics, The Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find The Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search The Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.